Hello, everyone. I'm Cynthia Myers Morrison, and I am a board member for the Food Addiction Institute. And it is my pleasure today to have the opportunity to talk with Bonnie Nolan, who is a board member for the Food Addiction Institute also. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Bonnie Nolan and invite her to tell us part of her personal story and her professional story and introduce herself to us all. Thank you. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thanks, Cynthia. Yes, my name is Bonnie Nolan, and I am a person in long-term recovery from alcohol. I started my sort of journey on this in this recovery world. Aside from my own personal recovery, I started this journey as a graduate student in neuroscience at Rutgers University. I was studying addiction. Addiction is rampant in my family, mostly alcohol. I believe food addiction is pretty rampant in my family as well. Although it's tricky because, as is so often the case, obesity is not rampant in my family. So it's tricky. There's this perception that food addiction is always linked with obesity, and that's not the case, of course. So at any rate, I entered recovery a long time ago, many years ago, with addiction with alcohol, and went back to school, got my college degree, and then my doctorate in neuroscience at Rutgers. I studied addiction. It was interesting to me. I studied the physiological effects of alcohol addiction and fatty liver disease, and also studied non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So we looked at things like sugar, carbohydrates, things that affect the liver, and of course saw unbelievable effects of those things on the liver and physiology. We mostly studied it in mice and rats. Incidentally, there were so many mice and rats that lost their lives to these studies that I eventually became vegan. That's a separate issue, but we'll talk a little bit about that. I worked on addiction and taught at Rutgers University for a number of years. I taught in the School of Biomedical Sciences. I taught essentially psychology oriented courses as well as behavioral pharmacology, so the effects of alcohol, drugs, as well as prescribed pharmaceuticals. It came to my attention through working with students that we were in the middle of an epidemic. I worked with students who were addicted and attending college, worked with students who were addicted to amphetamines, addicted to opioids, even heroin. In 2010, 2011, I was sort of struck by, when you're teaching at college, you expect a certain number of students to fall asleep during your classes. That's normal. But when a student is nodding off during office hours while they're talking to you, it's alarming. And then you start to understand that you're dealing with something much more serious. So at any rate, I became more interested in the clinical world. I became more interested in actually going out and helping these young people who were struggling with addiction. To make a long story short, I opened a center for addiction, an outpatient center. That the goal of this outpatient center was to reach as many people as possible. I wasn't interested in profit. I believed that people would come, people who needed help would come if I served them. And as it turned out, it became a very successful clinic. I should say, we treated hundreds of people who had opioid addiction during the opioid epidemic as it was burgeoning. It's still going on, of course. But as it was burgeoning, we treated hundreds of people of all ages. I was kind of expecting to see mostly people addicted to alcohol, but it turned out most of the people we treated were addicted to opioids and heroin. So we worked through that. Again, to try to make a long story short, I wanted these efforts to become more public. I realized that there was a problem with stigma with addiction that was keeping people from getting the help they needed. And this, by the way, of course, affects food addiction now. There's a stigma with that word that we seem to be struggling with. So we don't seem to see it as a medical condition, or we haven't in the past, and we're beginning to see that now with drugs for sure. I would love to see that happen across the board. Anyway, so I worked with our mayor, who wanted to make a broader effort to reach out to people who were addicted, and destigmatize it, and enable. What we started to recognize was the importance of recovery coaches. So recovery coaches, for people who are unfamiliar with this world, recovery coaches or peers are people who are in recovery themselves, who sort of reach a hand out to help someone who's struggling. The model exists already in the 12-step programs with sponsors. But what we wanted was, outside of the 12 steps, or including the 12 steps, but not limited to, peers who would go and help people who had experienced an overdose, to help them enter recovery. We started a program in our township. We created a division in the municipal government where recovery coaches would respond to overdoses. So they would actually go with the police or follow the police to overdose sites. This program became countywide. The job became very large. I ended up having to sell the center so that I could run this program. Sold the center. It ran for a long time, continues to run. And now I was working in this municipal program, did that for about 5 years, and then realized as the program got bigger and bigger and bigger, and more recovery coaches were reaching countywide, I was getting further and further away from the interpersonal contact with people with addiction that I wanted. I was sort of supervising more and more people and not actually reaching people individually. I wanted to get to private practice. I wanted to be able to speak to people one-on-one, help them learn the tools that I learned in my own recovery, but also tools that are evidence-based and that have been widely used for people to enter recovery successfully. During that time, I also noticed that there was a certification available in New Jersey for the first time for food addiction. So that was exciting to me. I had long been aware of food addiction, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a minute when I talk about my daughter, but I had been aware that food addiction was an issue for many people. I wanted this certification, but at first I was really just curious about it, and it was something that I could use to help more people. That was kind of how I thought about it. People who were not obvious. I knew a lot of people were addicted to things besides illicit substances and alcohol. I knew there were things within our culture that people were addicted to, media, pornography, but I knew that food was a serious addiction and that people were struggling with it and that was killing people. So I did this course. I was absolutely blown away by the stories I heard. The stories that I heard from the people in my class were as heartbreaking and gut-wrenching and terrifying as any story that I'd heard from somebody who was addicted to heroin or, alcohol. And as you can imagine, these are horror stories. I was hearing horror stories and I was heartbroken, and I could see the emotion. I could see the desperation. The people who are struggling just day to day with this deadly addiction. And I was hooked. I really just wanted to help people with this addiction. And of course, on some level, I could relate. My own food addiction, as it turned out, was not severe, moderate to severe, but not quite severe. And I was one of the lucky ones in the sense that once I sort of recognized what was happening, I was able to control it and still work to control it. So I still work to abstain from foods that are addictive to me. But I wanted to be able to treat people with food addiction. I got the certification, worked with Esther, which was, she's just such a delight. Esther is so knowledgeable and compassionate and, just so helpful in every way. So I loved the class, really enjoyed taking it, and met a lot of great people and went into private practice. And right up there with opioid addiction and alcohol addiction is food addiction in my center, the Nolan Center for Behavioral Health. So I've treated a number of people with food addiction. Some people wondering, well, how many people have recovered? How many people, would you say are better? You can't answer that question in the world of addiction. I mean, I would say that most of the people who have come to treatment and have worked it I would hope their lives are better for it. I know they struggle every day, and I know maybe sometimes the struggle feels maybe easier once you learn the coping skills. I think it gets easier. I think it becomes more habitual, but I know that it's always an ongoing battle. And as they say in AA, that the addiction is out there lifting weights. So people are always struggling. So I continue to do that. I've run a few groups for food addiction with great success, met a lot of great people, and am hoping to continue that. I would really love to have a large center with plenty of food certified counselors who can help many people with food addiction. And my hope is to get it to the point where this is a medical diagnosis, that people can use their insurance to cover food addiction separately from bulimia and anorexia and the other disordered eating diagnoses. I would love for food addiction to be a recognized diagnosis. First, so that people can get their treatment paid for, and second, to remove some of the stigma, because there's no question that food is addictive and that people are addicted to food. So I would love to get that taken care of. I would love to be part of getting that taken care of, getting it listed as a diagnosis that insurance must cover, as it covers other mental health issues. So I mentioned my daughter. My daughter is a beautiful young woman with probably the same sort of addictive eating habits that I had, of course. What she had that I didn't have was she had family members who were not food addicted, who didn't understand the importance of not bringing full-size candy bars into a house with a food addicted person, or not using food as emotional sort of treatment, I should say, an emotional salve. So my daughter got into the habit of eating candy when she wasn't feeling good. I totally understood that. And in the beginning, I didn't make a big deal out of it. But it became a very conflicted issue for me, which is problematic when a parent is worrying and thinking sort of almost obsessively about a child's eating habits. It can become problematic for the child, of course. I did a couple of things to try to help her. She, her pediatrician warned me that she was obese. There was a health issue there. But there's this push and pull all the time for parents about, especially with girls, to not make an issue of weight, to not make an issue of food, to not make, it should be a non-issue. We're told, if you talk about food excessively, and whatever that means, if you talk about food excessively to a child, you're going to be responsible for them getting anorexia in their teens. And it was such a conflicted time for me. She was just a young child, just happy, wonderful child, and always has been. It kind of came to a head for me. And I'm going to say for me, because it was almost more my issue than hers. It came to a head for me when she was 7, and I signed us both up for a nutrition camp in the summer. And what it was what she calls it now is fat camp. She feels that that's what it was. We went there, and a lot of their methods were a little bit probably antiquated. There was a lot of, low fat, a lot of processed foods, low fat, and a lot of exercise in the heat for these kids. I don't want to get into the weeds on this particular camp. It's a sanctioned camp. It's not something that, it's licensed and they're still running. And, but from my observations now, in retrospect, their camp is based on attitudes about dieting from the last century, and exercise, dieting, food in, food out, doesn't, calorie counting, that kind of thing, that is harmful. There were a lot of unhappy kids there, and my daughter was one of them. And, it was really kind of the first time that she looked at me and looked at her weight and started to think there's a problem. And, I screwed up, and I fully own that, and I own it to her now. However, it did open a conversation for us about food and food addiction, and what food is for and what it's not for. So it was clumsy, but it was from a good place. And fortunately, we have a really open relationship, and I can own the things that I've done wrong. And then we can have a conversation. She respects my understanding about addiction, but also I don't diagnose her. That's not my place. So we talked openly. We have talked about food. She corrects me when I say things like, this food is bad. That, she tells me, she's sort of picked up on a lot of this. She's now 13. She's at a very healthy weight. That's her doing. It doesn't have anything to do with me, except that I did start to request very firmly that full-size candy bars and cakes and cookies don't be brought into my house anymore because I have a food addiction. So we don't engage in that in the house. But her eating habits are her eating habits, and she's sort of figured out the place for food in her life, and it'll be an ongoing conversation. As far as I can tell, she doesn't have a food addiction right now. I do. And so I have to kind of keep my issues where they belong and let her develop how she's going to develop. But it's been it's just really brought home for me, literally, how tricky this issue is, and how difficult it is. We're so concerned with disordered eating, but we leave out a whole section of disordered eating, which is really, I think, if I may be so bold, killing so many more people than the eating disorders that we're so terrified of. And it's puzzling to me. Food addiction, I believe, kills many more people than the diseases that we're protecting our kids from. And of course, we should protect them from all diseases if we can, but this one needs some attention. And part of the issue, of course, is what kids are fed in schools, and what kids are fed at home, and the idea of calories in, calories out, without regard for what those calories consist of. Mm-hmm. So that's my journey with my daughter. And with raising a child, what we do now is we eat as healthy as we can. We enjoy cooking. I am a vegan. I don't try to put that on her. She chose on her own to be a vegetarian. But what that means for us is we use whole food, plant-based recipes when we cook, to the best of our ability. Of course, sometimes some processed food gets through in our case. But I know that, the goal is always to have as much whole foods as possible. What I am trying to do, I am not prescribing this for clients at all because I have not mastered it. What I am trying to do is develop, with the input of nutritionists and friends who are in the field, trying to develop a nutritionally adequate whole food, plant-based program for people who are food addicted. I would not be the first, of course. There are people like Chef AJ and other people who have worked on this and who have come up with really, in my opinion, very viable, healthy diets. And when I say diet, I mean plan of eating, of course. I don't mean, a temporary thing. But they've come up with, plans for life that include just plant-based foods. So I would love to do that. When I treat people now, I include meat, in whatever food plan, the gray sheet plans that we talk about, or whatever personalized food program we come up with. If the client already eats meat, then we include meat in the diet. But we're working on that, on the plant-based aspect. It's my experience, and of course, Cynthia, maybe you agree or don't. It's my experience that the vast majority of people who are food addicted would benefit from much more plant foods in their diet. I mean, when I'm vegan, and when I tried the gray sheet diet, I was shocked by how much vegetable matter is in there. It's a lot. And then, of course, I was supplementing with tofu or whatever. So yeah, it's very, I think there's no harm in adding more vegetables to a person's diet, of course. So I talked for a long time.
Oh,
what have I not answered?
Bonnie, that's so wonderful. You mentioned Esther, and her full name is Esther Helga Gudmundsdottir from the International Food Addiction Counselor Training, INFACT. And so if our listeners want to get more information about INFACT program and the one that influenced you to find that you were a food addict and are,
yes,
that is a program that's available. And she's a past chairperson for Food Addiction Institute, and a very important person in my own life as well. I was curious about the being a vegan, in that I've heard several people, Georgia Ede, one of them, who recently put out a new book, but describing the need for some animal proteins in the diet, even, for people that want to be vegan to include some animal proteins, because there are some amino acids that we cannot get without having animal proteins. So I want to put that piece out there for people to explore, and I agree with you that the amount of plant-based food in my eating plan is substantial.
Yes.
So
Yes, it
when
really is.
when people see what I eat, or when I go to order in a restaurant, they're always surprised, like, really? You're going to eat all that? And I say, yes.
Yes.
Sometimes I take something home, but I really do eat a lot of plant-based, but also some things that are not vegan. So, and I was vegan for about six years at one point in my life, but it didn't serve me well. I think it serves some people better than others. So
I
that's
think that's true.
to consider. And that's the genetic predisposition with, you can find out if you need to have more vegetarian or more animal-based products. So it is possible to learn that.
Sure.
What is your hope for the future? I mean, you've talked about your experience with your daughter, and I so appreciate you sharing that, and her process in coming to a place where she's finding her own way. What's your hope for the future in terms of young people in this country? Because when I walk around, I see so many young people that are essentially obese, and
Yes.
I mean, way beyond the bounds that were ones that I experienced as a young person. I mean,
Me too.
our food supply has changed, and what are we to do?
Yeah. I think one of the things that have to happen is we have to become aware of, what the various interests are, and how, the advice that we're getting often is sort of colored by, you know, um, shady funding sources. I mean, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but I think a lot of people are under the impression, and I was too, a lot of people are under the impression that, for example, nutritional guidelines are based on, panels of scientists that are objective and neutral. That's not the case. There's a lot of lobbying that happens. There's a lot of cost expedience that factors in. And, even as I said, just school lunches are based on a vast variety, or not even necessarily a variety, financial interests that are not necessarily in the interests of our kids. What I would like to see is, I would like to see a much more open, honest, nuanced, long discussion in our culture about diet, and the fact that these ultra processed foods are absolutely addicting. There's no question about that. I mean, there may be a question in the public at large, but there's no question in science. We understand that sugar is addicting, and that a lot of these ultra processed foods are essentially sugar in your body. There's no debate about that in academia and in the science world. But we get away from that, and we start to talk about things like, oh, you're, if you don't eat any ultra processed food, you're a radical, you're a granola, you're a pain. I mean, all these things happen. We've normalized really, really unhealthy foods, and no portion control, ingredients that are, the idea that high fructose corn syrup was in our food supply, it still is, but it certainly, there's been some light on it, thank goodness. But that was in our food supply for decades without people really thinking too much about it. And it's, that's a really addictive, harmful ingredient. And, I think we need to have more conversation about it. I think that children need to be educated about food. I don't know about you, but when I was a kid, we had home ec in school, home economics, and we learned about nutrition, and we learned about processed foods, and those kinds of things. They don't do that now. They don't have home ec. It's been sort of tossed out in favor of I don't know what. But kids don't get kids don't get a basic sort of get basic information about the food they're eating. Parents may not have gotten it at this point. I don't know how long it's been since nutrition was part of the curriculum in school at all. And we know so much more now than we did before. And there's so many more ingredients now than there were before that, are really either harmful or should only be taken in moderation that have become part of kids' everyday diet. You know, it seems parents are still under the impression that fruit juice is as good as fruit. You know, it's real. And I'm not making fun of it. Where would they learn this? I mean, it's not, widely available information. Parents care. They're trying to do the right thing. They're trying to make ends meet, foods that are not good for you. A lot of people are under the impression that foods that are not good for you are cheaper than foods that are. It's not necessarily the case. It's just a question of planning and looking for the kinds of ingredients, sometimes cooking. I'd love to see more of an emphasis placed on spending time cooking the food you're eating as opposed to convenience. It's a layered problem. So, part of the problem is no one has time to cook. So people haven't learned to make food that it can be done quickly, that isn't necessarily time consuming, but is also healthy. The convenient fast food or convenient prepackaged food in the grocery store is cheap and easy, and people eat that. And I don't think it's a flaw in human nature. And I don't think these are people who want their kids to be unhealthy or want themselves to be unhealthy. I think it's just the problem has gotten overwhelming. And I really do think I would love to see people really recognize that the obesity epidemic is in large part because of food addiction. And a lot of food addiction has to do with what food choices are available. So there needs to be some regulation, more regulation about ingredients for sure. There needs to be a formal diagnosis for food addiction. But I think we need to recognize that at this point, there is some degree of food addiction that is pervasive. And it has to do with the type of food that we're eating, that is being sold cheap. Cynthia, I think it's a whole lifestyle change. I think we would really have to start to emphasize in a meaningful way the importance of the health of our kids. I really do think Michelle Obama tried to do it. And I think she was thwarted at every turn by bigger interests. She did the best she could, but I would love to see somebody take that effort up again and people really get behind it, because, the kids who grew up in the obesity epidemic are now struggling with the consequences of it. And this is going to be a very costly problem for us. And it's not something that's addressed. It's just not in a meaningful way. I don't think it's something that's addressed, and it's very, very costly and painful. There's a lot of emotional pain that comes with this. A lot of you mentioned, in our conversation, and I've had this conversation with people before. I know in my experience, recovery from alcohol and drugs often puts a spotlight on a pre-existing food addiction. In my case, it did, and in many cases, it does. But what happens, so what happens is we really have this attitude, well, a food addiction isn't going to kill you. It's as long as you're not using alcohol or opioids, then you go ahead and drink. And this is not, it's not unique to food. I even see this in the addiction world with cigarettes. I see it with, things that we know are going to kill you eventually. They're just not going to kill you today. We're not oriented that way. We're oriented to what's going to take care of us right now, what's going to keep us alive right now. And it's just so short-sighted. I mean, it would really take a paradigm shift for us to stop thinking that way.
Well, and so many of the things that we think, oh, those are addictions that won't kill you right now. Right. They may kill you later down the road, for sure. Yes. Even after years of being abstinent from the substances of nicotine and alcohol, throat cancer is a real deal that can take the larynx and take all of these things. That's happening close and personal right now for me, for my husband. But with the cross triggering, so in my own case, for years, I could stop eating sugar periodically, and I would feel better, and I would lose weight, and I would, be more vibrant in my life. But then, because I was still eating grains, I would trigger the sugar addiction and be back into sugar and grains. And it was only when I removed both of those things from my eating plan that suddenly the fog cleared, my body changed, and I've stayed at the same, essentially the same weight for 25 years because I'm not eating grains or sugar. And that was a massive change in all aspects of my personal life. But that's one that, as you mentioned earlier, people refer to like, well, you can't live without grains. I mean, bread and pasta, and you can't live. Pizza? I mean, really, you can't live. And I mean, I eat many things that are, my own creations for taking the place of those kinds of things, but in a way that I'm willing to eat them. And like you, there are some processed foods that I still eat, but
Mhm.
in very small quantities compared to, what it was. So
Yeah,
all of these things, we need people in so many different arenas to reach out and start to help people to become more aware, as you said, and to take action, and that we buy the things. And if you don't bring them into your home, as you've described, that's a
yeah,
big change. If it's not in your home and you spend time cooking and eating there, if people start, as Michelle Obama did with, she moved away from trying to head on to the manufacturers. She went to the gardening. If people are making their own gardens and seeing their own food grow and
yes,
enjoying that whole process, that's another thing. And families doing things together to take time that used to be involved with food consumption, to take
right.
time to do other things together. And those are also hard when people are busy lives and multiple layers of experiences as you described. So
Mhm.
what kinds of things, especially with a teen, what kinds of things do the two of you do together that you can suggest for other parents to be involved with their teens?
Yeah, that's such a great question. And it touches on so many things I was thinking about. Cross tolerance is the scientific term for when you might be dependent on one thing, but something else can trigger the same reaction, right? What we're addicted to when we're addicted is dopamine, right? So if something triggers dopamine, it's going to, an excessive spike, it might trigger you to seek out the thing that you're knowingly addicted to. The activities that I love to do with my daughter. We do love to cook together. We do that, and we make great recipes with sweet potatoes that we grew. We definitely garden together. I love to garden. I'm not very good at it, but I'm learning. But for example, we got a huge um, crop of pumpkin squash this year. Like, what are you going to do with all that pumpkin squash? But we're figuring it out. We're roasting it. The house smells good. You learn these things. But that's what you do things together, because really what that does is it helps you feel good. It gives you that dopamine spike. Hanging out with people that you like. That's something that we don't really, in our country anyway. I think we really have lost sight of the idea of just enjoying each other's company, enjoying being together, enjoying creating things together. And it can be food, but it doesn't have to be. Um, so gardening, we walk together. She loves to walk with me, and I love to walk with her. So we walk together. I am a runner. She doesn't like to run. So my running time is separate. When she likes to dance. So she dances, and sometimes we dance together. We have little dance parties, but sometimes we watch movies together. I mean, doing things together. We go to the beach. She's like my best friend right now. And she's 13. So I know that's probably limited, and I'm enjoying it while it lasts. But yeah, just spending time together, talking, listening, you know, even shopping, but yeah, we spend a lot of time outside. We spend a lot of time just hanging around together. And there are times when I could certainly be working. I could be figuring out how to build my business. I could be cleaning the house. I'm just sitting with her sometimes, and she's telling me some funny story about something that happened in school. And I am working to stay present and enjoy that. And just recognizing the value of that time, I think is really important. And giving yourself that time, giving yourself a break, saying, I don't have to be working 24/7. This is probably more valuable, more important, certainly is, than doing some extra thing for work. It's a like I said, it's a mental shift. There doesn't have to there Some activities are really nice. There doesn't have to be an activity. Sometimes we're just sitting together and talking and walking something. And we do a lot of that. She loves to make slime still. So sometimes she'll make slime. I'll make it with her sometimes, or sometimes I'm just watching her make slime while she's talking.
Tell me what slime is.
Slime is funny. It's a trend, I think, that's probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 years old now. But it's basically, it's clear glue with shaving cream and some kind of color or texture. So you can put sequins in it. You can put food coloring in it. And it's sort of if you make it right, and she's become a master at it, if you make it right, it kind of sticks together, but it doesn't stick to you. So you hold it and it falls down. I mean, it's just kind of um, a funny texture that it just looks like a big glob of colored glue, but it's fun, and it's kind of a creative outlet. It's nice. One of the reasons that it's nice is because you're not actually going to make anything out of it. The activity is that you're making slime, and you can think of different ways to make it look pretty, or it's just a sort of intrinsically pleasant thing to do, and she enjoys it. So I love that. I love that she does that. All I have to do is keep her supplied with clear glue.
So if we could have the recipe for her recipe, if she'd be willing to share it
Sure.
online so
Sure.
that we could share that with others, that sounds really fun.
Sure.
The, um, regarding the pumpkin, and for those people who don't have the pumpkins outside in the garden, it comes in a can also without any other things in it. Pumpkin and a tray of ice cubes and cinnamon and nutmeg and kefir milk or yogurt blended
Mhm.
together so that the ice crystals are all blended is a wonderful creamy
Wow.
ice cream, pumpkin
That sounds
flavored.
amazing. I
And
love that.
it's so easy and so abundant whenever you.
Yes.
So
That is a great idea because I really need a use for these pumpkins.
there you go. There's
So
some.
I will definitely do that. I love that.
It's really fun. Easy too. That's one
Mhm.
of those, it takes 5 minutes, if
Yeah, I
that.
love it.
So, well, these are the kinds of things that letting people know how how easy and fun being a parent to a teen can be, and
Yes.
linking, having relationship and having things not be about the food, but about living and mindfully being present. I so appreciate you talking about that. So
Mhm.
it's fabulous.
Yes.
Well,
You
what?
know, I think that's, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I
Oh,
think that mindfully being present is the thing that is the thing I spend the most time talking to clients about. Doing a body scan, taking a deep breath, telling your body that you're not in danger, you know, when you have an urge, recognizing that it passes, that you don't actually have to do the thing you're craving for the urge to pass. It will pass on its own. That's that's the mindfulness piece is just so important. And that's, I probably should have said when you asked me what was the thing we should change, that is the thing that we need to introduce.
that idea of this too shall pass, which you
Yes.
just described, and
Yes.
and not thinking about the future. I have to do this forever, but I'm doing this right now. I'm doing it right
That's
now,
right.
right
That's right.
now.
Just do the next right thing. That's all. Yep.
But it's such a simple idea, and yet it really works to take away some of the burden of that impossible future that, I can't know what I can do in the future.
Right.
And the past I can't change. I can change this moment right now. So
Right.
I so appreciate all of this. Well, do you have a website if people are interested in coming to see you, to get in touch with you? How can they reach you?
Absolutely. So you'll get the Nolan Center for Behavioral Health is my website. spelled out, but the easy one to remember is Dr. Bonnie Talks Addiction. I blog there a little bit, but it has links to all my websites.
That's
So www.drbonnietalksaddiction.com.
very nice. And such a wonderful segue into just saying welcome to the board of Food Addiction Institute, and we so appreciate your presence. And what is it that you hope to do as a board member? Is there anything, or how you became a board member? What brought you to the board, and then?
Yes. So I was very honored to be invited to be in the board. Esther Helga submitted my name, and I was flattered, honored, surprised. But I think she felt that my science background would be helpful, and I agree. I mean, I've always loved science. I've always loved sort of investigating things and finding evidence for things, and then using that evidence to address real world issues. What I hope to accomplish is I would love to be part of the push to make this addiction a recognized issue that, in the US anyway, everything has to be sort of run by insurance. Everything goes through insurance. I think that's unfortunate, but that's the way it is. People are not going to get the treatment they need unless insurance recognizes it. And I would love to be part of that. Obviously, as a provider, that's helpful to me, but that's not why I'm doing it. I mean, I treat people sometimes. I treat people who don't have the ability to pay at all. And that's not bragging. I'm just saying that it's not a self-serving thing that I'm doing this. I'm doing it because I really do believe, as a culture, we need to recognize that addiction in general is a mental health issue, that mental health issues are medical issues, and there is a place for that. It's not the whole story, but there's a place for it, and all people, regardless of income, need to be able to get treatment for it. And as a society, it will benefit us to treat people. This is a very, very costly illness for us as a society. I would love to be part of that. I would love to be part of the movement that legitimizes food addiction, for lack of a better way of saying it, for everyone to understand that it's an important condition that needs treatment. I also am really looking forward to working with this group of people. I've been really kind of, I've been blown away. You and Michael and other people really just on the board really seem to be very pragmatic and looking toward growing the awareness of food addiction, spreading the awareness among providers and the general public. I am interested in being part of that. I respect this group. I think that there's a lot of good work to be done, and I'm just looking forward to being part of all of that. And if my science background is helpful, that's great.
It will definitely, and is already very much appreciated. One thing, the idea for the International Food Addiction Consensus Conference, IFACC, which people can look for 24, and it will also be coming in Mexico City in 25, has a group that are related to two other programs. One is Collaboration for Kids, and one is the Public Health Collaborative in Britain. And they're making inroads for the ICD, the International Classification of Diseases. So they're progressing in a parallel place in terms of what we're trying to do also here in the United States. But one of the things that isn't yet incorporated into the food addiction, I'm forgetting the name now, the ultra processed food addiction, etc., is the whole idea of volume eating and the idea of grazing, and that those two may be with perfectly healthy whole foods. They may be, but there's still problems for the person who is food addicted. So that's one of the other things, that even after we have ultra processed food addiction, we need to incorporate some things that address those in a not otherwise designated category. So your thoughts about that. Have you seen people that are just healthy eaters? They're eating only healthy things,
Yes,
but still are over consuming even,
absolutely.
you know, so
Yes,
that's one of those other
absolutely.
side issues that isn't yet addressed, but hopefully will be. So,
Yes, agreed. I mean, and hopefully we'll have, you have, just as you have, we have a diagnosis for opioid addiction, unspecific, and then we have opioid addiction with underlying anxiety, opioid addiction with withdrawal. And we can do the same for food addiction. You can have food addiction unspecific and or unspecified. You can have food addiction ultra processed. You can have food addiction with multiple sort of specific subsets of
mhm,
symptoms. Absolutely. I've seen people and have known people who likely have a food addiction who are, I mean, really just eating for any other reason than to sustain their nutrition. But excessively to the point where it's actually causing harm, of course.
mhm,
And yes, that exists. And I think it's something that needs to be there needs to be some leeway for providers to recognize that there's an addiction. And it doesn't, if ultra processed foods are not part of the picture, that does not mean that the client's not food addicted and not still suffering, of course.
I so appreciate that
Mhm.
perspective. I hope others like you will see that and engage in it so that we get a broader inclusion, not only for the mental disorder, but for the behavioral disorder as well, which I think many people in Europe were looking at food addiction as an eating addiction to the process of eating. And here in the United States, we look at the mental process and some of the behavioral that we haven't. That's part of this grazing and volume eating too. So many
Sure.
aspects. Oh my gosh, I could talk with you, Bonnie, forever.
Oh, yeah, same. I agree. It's all very, very interesting and very important, I think.
Really important. And I'm so grateful that you're participating in Food Addiction Institute. And we welcome partners. So if there are others of you out there listening today, please contact Michael Prager, our Food Addiction Institute chair, and be partnering with us in terms of getting information out to the public about the resources that you have available, and that also the resources that we conjointly can create for others. So it's a big job and we all need to be participating. If you wish to donate to Food Addiction Institute, there's a button on our Food Addiction Institute site. We're always happy to receive small or large donations. And please join us in this. And Bonnie Nolan, thank you so much for being part of this talk today and for
My pleasure.
sharing your wisdom and experience. So thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Cynthia.